My name is Clara. I am 28 years old now, but when I look back, my life was shaped by a single day when I was only 7. It was raining hard that evening. The car windows were blurred with streaks of water, and the wipers moved back and forth in a rhythm that almost felt like a lullaby. My mom sat in the passenger seat, turning to smile at me now and then. My dad was focused on the road, leaning forward slightly, both hands gripping the wheel. I sat in the back seat with my stuffed bear, the one I carried everywhere. His fur was worn, one ear hanging lower than the other, but he was mine. I pressed him against my chest and listened to the thunder outside. "Almost home, sweetheart," my mom said, turning her head toward me. Her smile was the kind that always made me feel safe. And then everything went black. When I woke up, I wasn't in the car anymore. I was in a hospital bed. My arm was heavy, wrapped in a cast, and my head throbbed with every breath. A nurse sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap, her face soft and kind. She leaned closer when my eyes opened. "Hi, sweetheart. Your name is Clara, right?" I nodded slowly. My throat was dry. She took my small hand gently in hers, and her eyes filled with something I didn't understand then. "Pity. Sorrow. I'm so sorry, Clara," she whispered. "Your mom and dad, they didn't survive the crash." I remember blinking at her, waiting for the words to make sense. Waiting for someone to correct her, to tell me it wasn't true. But the silence in that hospital room was louder than the thunder I had heard in the car. I waited for days, hoping they would walk through the door. Hoping it was all just a mistake. But they never came. And that was the moment my childhood ended. After a few days, a woman I barely knew came to pick me up. Her name was Aunt Carol, though she wasn't really my aunt, just my dad's cousin. I had seen her once at a wedding years before. She didn't hug me. She didn't even smile. She just said, "Come on, let's go," and walked ahead of me. Her husband, Tom, drove the car. He didn't say a word. I sat in the back with my little bag and my bear, feeling like I had been dropped into a stranger's world. When we reached their house, it looked neat and ordinary from the outside. A small garden. Clean floors inside. Toys scattered in the living room. A family picture on the wall. 2 children, a boy and a girl, were playing on the carpet when I walked in. They looked about my age. Their laughter filled the air, but when they saw me, they stopped. "Who's she?" the boy asked. "She's staying with us now," Aunt Carol said flatly. "Go inside." That night, I learned just how temporary my place in their home would be. Instead of a bedroom, Aunt Carol gave me a thin mat and a blanket on the kitchen floor. "You'll sleep here," she said briskly, pointing to the space near the stove. I looked at her, my voice trembling. "Can I sleep in the room with them?" She shook her head. "No. This is fine. You'll be safe here." Then she turned off the light and left me in the dark. The floor was hard. The kitchen smelled faintly of onions and soap. I hugged my bear tight, pressed my face into his fur, and cried as quietly as I could. Nobody heard me. Nobody came. That was the first night of my new life. From that day on, I was never part of Aunt Carol's family. I was something else. The extra child. The shadow in the house. In the mornings, the smell of pancakes and warm milk would drift from the dining room. My cousin sat at the table with full plates, eggs, toast, sometimes even sausages. I was given what was left behind. A piece of cold bread. Rice scraped from the bottom of the pot. Sometimes just water. I didn't complain. I knew it wouldn't matter. At school, I was the quiet girl. My clothes didn't fit quite right and my shoes were old, with the soles starting to wear thin. I kept my head down when other children laughed or whispered about me. Smiling felt heavy, so most days I didn't try. One afternoon, I sat alone on the playground, my knees pulled to my chest. The other kids ran in groups, shouting, playing tag, tossing balls. I watched them from the edge, wishing for a moment I could slip into their world. Then someone sat down beside me. "Hi, sweetheart," a gentle voice said. I looked up. It was Rosa, the school janitor. She was older, with short gray hair tucked behind her ears and a faint smell of soap and flowers clinging to her. She had a kind face, lined from years of smiling. "Why are you sitting alone?" she asked softly. I don't have anyone to play with, I murmured, staring at the ground. Rosa tilted her head, studying me with eyes that saw more than I wanted to show. Then she reached into the large bag she carried. Would you like a book? I lifted my eyes. A book? She pulled out a small, worn storybook. The cover was bent, the pages yellowed at the edges. But when she placed it in my hands, it felt like treasure. You can keep it, she said. And if you want more, come see me after school. That was the first time anyone outside my parents had given me something just for me. That night, while my cousins watched cartoons in the living room, I lay on the kitchen floor, using a small flashlight I had found in the shed. I opened Rosa's book and read every word. The kitchen around me faded. The cold floor beneath me didn't matter. For a few hours, I was in another world, one where children were brave, animals spoke, and kindness always won. From then on, Rosa became my secret friend. She would slip me books from the lost and found, ones no one claimed. Fairy tales, adventures, stories of people who kept going even when the world was cruel. At home, my cousins teased me. Clara lives in the kitchen, the boy would say, laughing. She smells like soup, the girl added. She's not really family. I stayed silent. Words never protected me. One day at school, my teacher announced, next week, there will be a storytelling contest. Anyone who wants to join can sign up. The idea stayed in my head all day. That night, curled under the kitchen table, I wrote my story with an old pencil on scraps of paper I had rescued from the recycling bin. It was about a lonely girl who could talk to birds. The world ignored her, but the birds listened, sang to her, and gave her hope. When I handed it to my teacher, her eyes softened. This is beautiful, Clara, she said. The day of the contest, I stood in front of the class, clutching my paper. My hands trembled, and my voice shook at first. But as I read, something happened. The room grew quiet. Even the boys who usually shouted during lessons stopped to listen. By the end, my voice was steady, strong. When I finished, my teacher clapped. Clara, she said warmly, you win. I couldn't believe it. That afternoon, Rosa hugged me tightly after school. I knew you had a gift, she whispered. At home, no one said a word. Aunt Carol didn't ask. My cousins rolled their eyes. She thinks she's special now, one of them muttered. That night, I lay on the kitchen floor, holding my prize in my hands, a small notebook with a golden cover. It was the most beautiful gift I had ever owned. And for the first time in a long while, I fell asleep with a smile. I woke the next morning to the faint sound of gulls crying somewhere in the distance. For a moment, as my eyes blinked open, I had forgotten where I was. The pale curtains swayed gently by the open window, and the unfamiliar smell of sea air told me I was no longer in the city apartment I had left behind, but here, in this quiet coastal town where I hoped to rebuild something of myself. The first few days passed slowly, like water dripping from a faucet. I had nothing but time, but the weight of it sometimes pressed against me in ways I could not quite describe. I wandered the shoreline, let the cold waves curl around my ankles, and watched children chase each other along the sand with squeals of laughter. I did not join them. I kept to myself, hands deep in my pockets, a quiet observer of a world that still moved while mine had stood still for so long. Each night, I wrote in a small notebook. Little pieces of thought, memories I did not want to lose, questions I did not yet have answers for. At first, my words were heavy, crowded with grief and guilt. But slowly, day by day, they softened. I began to write about the way the light stretched across the water at dusk, or the kindness of the woman who sold me bread and tucked an extra roll into the bag just because. Still, there were nights when the silence grew too large. I would curl on the narrow bed in my rented room, pressing my hand to my chest as though I could hold my heart steady. On those nights, I missed Daniel most, his easy smile, his unshakable calm, the way he used to hum quietly when he worked with his hands. I missed the future we had promised each other, the family we never had the chance to build. One evening, I walked into a small cafe tucked along the main street. The walls were painted soft yellow, and the air carried the rich smell of coffee beans and cinnamon. I sat near the window, ordering nothing more than tea, just to have somewhere to be. The cafe owner, a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, noticed the worn look of me. She set down my cup and asked my name. Clara, I said, my voice small. Well, Clara, she replied warmly, this town takes care of its own. You're safe here. Her words slipped into me like sunlight through a crack. I held on to them, replaying them in my mind long after I left the cafe. Safe. It had been so long since I had felt that. In the weeks that followed, I began to notice small gestures everywhere. A fisherman waving as I passed the pier. Children offering me wildflowers without asking my name. Strangers who smiled as though I belonged. Slowly, these tiny kindnesses stitched themselves into me, fragile threads of hope I hadn't known I still carried. But perhaps the most important change came when I met a group of women who gathered every Wednesday evening in the library basement. I had seen the notice on the board, story circle, come share, listen, or simply sit with us. For a long while I hovered outside the door, unsure if I was brave enough to enter. The night I finally stepped inside, the room smelled faintly of old books and chamomile tea. A circle of chairs filled the space, and women of all ages sat holding notebooks, scraps of paper, even just their memories. No one looked at me with suspicion. No one asked for explanations. Instead, they made room, sliding a chair into the circle as though it had been waiting for me all along. When it came my turn, my voice trembled. I spoke of love lost, of the storm that had taken Daniel's life, of the silence that followed me for years afterward. My words broke more than once, but no one interrupted. No one hurried me along. They simply listened. And in their listening, I found a kind of release I had not known I needed. That night, walking home beneath a silver moon, I felt lighter. Not healed, not yet, but perhaps healing. It was then that the first true idea for the little lighthouse began to form. Not a place of bricks and stone, but a home of safety and warmth. A shelter for those, like me, who had weathered storms they could not control. A place where people could gather, share their stories, and remind one another that, even in the darkest nights, light could still be found. I wrote the words in my notebook before I went to sleep, the little lighthouse. A place to begin again. Time passed. Slowly at first, like winter ice cracking under the sun, and then quicker, as if life wanted me to catch up to the living again. I returned to my work at the library. The books smelled the same, the shelves whispered with the same quiet comfort, but something in me had changed. I no longer hurried through the aisles. Instead, I paused to notice the children giggling in the reading corner, the old man in his usual seat by the history section, the young mother who asked for bedtime stories for her toddler. One afternoon, while shelving a pile of returned books, I stumbled across a copy of End of Green Gables. I opened the cover and found a small handwritten note tucked inside. For the reader who needs reminding that joy can return. No name, no explanation. Just that. My throat tightened, but I smiled. Maybe healing didn't always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it slipped quietly into your day like that note, unexpected, undeserved, but deeply needed. I began writing more in my journal. Not just pain anymore, but small gratitude lists. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery. The warmth of sunlight on my hands as I turned pages. The laughter of children chasing pigeons outside the library steps. Slowly, I started sketching again too. Little things at first, teacups, window frames, a stray cat that slept on the neighbor's porch. Then, bigger drawings, a seaside cottage with curtains fluttering in the breeze, a girl standing on a hill holding a lantern high, a circle of children gathered in a cozy room. Each drawing felt like a thread stitching me back to myself. It was spring when James arrived in town. He came to the library one rainy afternoon, dripping wet, holding a notebook under his jacket to keep it dry. "Is there a place I can sit and write?" he asked, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. I nodded and pointed him toward the window seat. He came every day after that, sometimes staying for hours, scribbling into his notebook with an intensity that made me curious. One evening, as I was closing up, I found him still there. "You'll get locked in if you stay too long," I teased. He looked up, startled, then smiled. "Sorry. I lose track of time when I write." "What do you write?" I asked. Stories, he said simply. Sometimes about people I've met. Sometimes about people I wish I'd met. Something about that answer struck me deeply. For so long, I had wished to meet kindness, wished for someone to understand the quiet ache I carried. And here was this man, creating stories out of wishes. We talked more after that. About books, about small-town life, about loss. He told me he had lost his younger sister years ago, and grief had pushed him into writing. I guess stories were my way of keeping her alive, he admitted. I nodded. I think stories keep us all alive in some way. James and I began walking together after library hours. Down the quiet streets, past the little bakery where I bought bread, past the harbor where boats bobbed lazily on the water. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, it was with thoughtfulness. He never tried to fix my pain. He simply sat with it, and that felt like a kind of healing I had never known. Months passed, and without planning it, I found myself laughing again. Real laughter, not the hollow kind I had forced for years. One summer evening, as we sat by the harbor, James turned to me. "Clara," he said softly, "you ever think about building something of your own? Something that carries your heart in it?" I hesitated, then whispered, "Yes. I've always dreamed of a place where children could come to read, paint, and feel safe. A place called the Little Lighthouse." His eyes lit up. "Then let's make it real." The dream grew from paper sketches into something tangible. We found a small abandoned cottage near the water, its paint peeling, its windows dusty, but full of promise. Together, we cleaned it, painted the walls, filled the shelves with donated books, and set up little tables with jars of crayons and paints. Neighbors pitched in, some bringing rugs, others bringing armchairs, others dropping off baskets of toys. When it finally opened, children flooded in like sunlight. They curled up with storybooks, painted bright flowers on paper, and laughed in ways that made my chest ache with joy. One little girl handed me a crayon drawing of a lighthouse. "This is your house," she said with a grin. And maybe she was right. It wasn't just a place for children. It was a home for pieces of me I thought I had lost forever. James became more than a friend. Slowly, naturally, without rushing. He was there in the laughter of the children, in the evenings spent painting new murals on the cottage walls, in the quiet moments when he held my hand as we watched the sea. One night, under the glow of lanterns at the harbor, he whispered, "Clara, you are the bravest person I know. You turned your pain into light for others." Tears blurred my eyes, but this time they weren't heavy. They were soft, cleansing. For years, I had carried grief like a shadow. But now, standing with James, watching the little lighthouse shine, I realized something. I hadn't been broken all along. I had been building. Slowly, quietly, painfully, but building nonetheless. And now, at last, I had arrived at the shore of my own story. Thank you for watching, and come back for more real moments.